Hello, I'm Dottie Kay. Welcome to the fourth program on the law and local government. This series is presented as a public service and is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Upper St. Clair and Mr. Robert Hackett, attorney at law. The format consists of a lecture and general summary of each topic by Mr. Hackett, with League members leading discussion on the particular subject. Although the programs are taped, the discussion is unrehearsed and spontaneous. Last time, we looked at the township fiscal matters, and we continue today's presentation, the fundamentals of land use control.
Today we start in our discussion concerning the township of Upper St. Clair with probably what is the most important subject to the citizens of Upper St. Clair. This discussion will take the next 3 programs because of its importance to the citizens. The discussion concerns land use control. I moved to the township in 1960, and I moved because I liked the way the township looked. I liked the rolling land of the township, and the township's residential quality appealed to me. Most people do the same thing, and therefore land use control is what involves most citizens in Upper St. Clair. But what is land use control? How is it managed? What are the players in land use control? What are the legal aspects of land use control? In the next 3 sessions, we will discuss in a thorough manner all of the aspects of land use control as it affects the citizens of the township. It will not be a legalese discussion. Rather, it will be a discussion so that the citizens can understand the process of land use control. Our first program will focus exactly on that. What is land use control? Who controls the land use? And how do we control the land use problems of the township? Land use control involves more than zoning. It involves a total planning concept for the township. Coincidentally, the township is now adopting a new comprehensive plan for 1985, and you will be hearing about that in the very near future. Today, let us look at the players of land use control. Who is involved? First, the governing body, that is your elected commissioners. Second, a planning commission appointed by the governing body. Third, the zoning hearing board, a quasi-judicial board appointed by the governing body. Fourth, the administration, the planning department of the township of Upper St. Clair, and the township manager. Then we have the fifth and maybe the most important player. You, the public, are involved in land use control because you elect the commissioners, and the commissioners respond as much as they can to what the public wants. First of all, we start in land use control on what it is with this principle. In America, in a free country, one should be able to do what he wants to with his own property. The rights of your property and your person are guaranteed by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Therefore, if I own a piece of property in Upper St. Clair, why can't I put a pig farm on it if I want to? It's my property. Why can the township tell me what to do with my property? Don't I have a right to make a living and use my property as I see fit? That's been true in America for 100 years, for 200 years, since the country started. If I own 3,000 acres in a forest, can I cut the trees? Can I do what I want? Well, that's not what the courts have said in America. And it all started in Cleveland, Ohio, about 1926, when the suburbs of Cleveland were first developing. There was a little suburb called Euclid. And the city of Euclid, or town of Euclid, decided they wanted to plan their land use. And the people of Euclid, some of them, objected and said, we want to use our property for what we want to use it for. Well, the Supreme Court of the United States said, yes, a municipality has the right under its police powers to control land for the benefit of the welfare of the public. Now you will see, and if you focus on those words, you will see in the future what does for the benefit of the public mean. That is a key understanding in order to look at zoning and the concept of zoning and land use control. We therefore have the dichotomy, the tension between the land which I want to use for my pig farm and the township saying to me, you can't use your land for a pig farm because the smell will disturb the neighbors. How far can the township go? How many rules can they pass? What procedures do they have to follow? All this involves land use control and involves this tension or dichotomy between the landowner and the municipality controlling the use of the land. First of all, in Pennsylvania, you have what is called the Municipalities Planning Code. It's a state law which applies to all municipalities except Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Therefore, the township of Upper St. Clair, even though it's a home rule community, is governed by the Municipalities Planning Code as to zoning and planning. The Municipalities Planning Code states the general rules. It says, for instance, that if a community has a zoning ordinance, you must have a planning commission. It says if a community has a zoning ordinance, it must have a zoning hearing board. It tells you what the governing body in general can do and what it can't do. The Municipalities Planning Code is a very useful law to make it responsive to this tension or dichotomy between the landowner and the municipality. It sets the basic rules under which we can plan our zoning, enact our zoning, and so on. Today, I am going to explain to you the functions of the four players: the governing body, the planning commission, the zoning hearing board, and the administration. First, look at the governing body. The governing body is the elected officials, that body which enacts the basic zoning ordinance. The planning commission can enact an ordinance, the zoning hearing board can enact an ordinance, the people can't enact an ordinance. Very important. The people cannot force the governing body to enact an ordinance. They can, of course, vote for their commissioners, vote for the legislators, but they can't force a particular ordinance. So the governing body has the responsibility to enact the zoning ordinance. In Upper St. Clair, we have a very complicated and thorough zoning ordinance, and the zoning ordinance was enacted in Upper St. Clair as far back as 1960. Today's ordinance is much more responsive to the needs of the community, and the governing body is the body that makes that ordinance responsive. However, the governing body doesn't have time to determine every aspect of the ordinance. Therefore, they depend on a planning commission. In Upper St. Clair, the planning commission is appointed by the governing body, and the planning commission is the commission which plans for the community. That is, it studies the comprehensive plan. It looks at the road problems. It looks at the floodplain problems. It looks at the recreational problems. It looks at the total community. The Planning Commission, for example, is the commission which should recommend changes in zoning if a community develops in a way that causes land to be usable for one particular use and unusable for another particular use. Far too often in many communities, the Planning Commission acts as nothing but a reviewer of what the township engineer should do. That is, the Planning Commission should use long-range planning and conceptual planning as its basis for existence. Therefore, it's important to a community that the Planning Commission in fact plan and not act as a body which reviews the administration's job and the engineer's job. That's why we pay the administration and the engineers. This Planning Commission in Upper St. Clair, for example, has done exactly that. They have spent the last year or year and a half completely looking at the community in order to develop a new comprehensive plan. Therefore, it is the Planning Commission which makes recommendations to the governing body. But remember, the Planning Commission in Upper St. Clair is purely advisory. Now let's look at the Zoning Hearing Board. The Zoning Hearing Board is a board which helps interpret the ordinance and which helps decide variances for our zoning ordinance and which passes and acts on special exceptions under our ordinance. We are now getting into zoning lingo. At this session, I'm not going to tell you what a variance is or a special exception. We will cover that in the next session. But what I want you to know is that the Zoning Hearing Board is appointed by the governing body and acts as a judicial body. That is, their decisions under state law amount to decisions of a local agency judicial body. The decisions can be appealed to court as any other local agency decision, and the decisions carry the weight of law unless appealed. It's important then that the members of the Zoning Hearing Board understand that they function in a judicial capacity. That is, when they have a request for an adjudication, a decision in front of them, it's not a popularity contest. You don't grant someone a variance, and we'll find out what that is later, because you like them or don't like them, or because you like the project or don't like the project. As a judicial body, you look at the zoning law in the community and in the state and under the constitutions of the state and the federal government, and you decide the decision in accordance with that law, statutory law, constitutional law, and case law. Therefore, the zoning hearing board, that's a good zoning hearing board, has strict judicial procedures, and it makes its decisions in accordance with state, federal, and local law. Now let's look at the administration's focus in zoning. The administration provides the workers, provides the mechanics of preparing the zoning law and getting the zoning law before the governing body and to the Planning Commission. Upper St. Clair has a Department of Community Planning, a very active department. In that department, it administers the zoning ordinance. Very important. It sees that Bob Hackett, after he was told he couldn't have a pig farm, doesn't have a pig farm. We send an inspector out to look at the land. The inspectors have the right to enforce the ordinance. They issue citations or violation notices, which each citizen must obey. Otherwise, the citizen is fined under the zoning ordinance and under the laws of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Therefore, it's the administration that produces the nitpicky little items which you must have to function, and also produces the administrative arm to enforce the ordinance. Finally, when we look at land use control, we must keep in mind that land use control, although primarily zoning under the Upper St. Clair zoning ordinance, does not just involve zoning. It's a total planning concept. It involves, for instance, in Upper St. Clair, the use of the floodplain ordinance. We now have a floodplain ordinance that controls building in our floodplains, the McLaughlin Run, Chartiers Creek, and so on. It also involves the planning for roads. That is, what roads are main or arterial roads, what roads are collector roads, what roads are local roads, and the building and maintenance of these roads. This is done by generally the administration, but remember, the governing body has to approve the budget and has to pay for the roads. Furthermore, it is done by public ownership of land. The planning of a community and the land use control of a community involves proper public ownership for public buildings, most important in Upper St. Clair, for public recreation. Upper St. Clair has one of the finest recreation programs in any community of its size. Recently, the state just deeded over 200 acres to Upper St. Clair to use as a recreational park in the property located off Boyce Road, commonly known as the Mayview property. This public ownership of land involves the total land use control because it provides the open area and green space for the citizens of Upper St. Clair. Therefore, when we look at the concept of land use control for the citizens, we must have the overall view of the tools of land use control. That is, how is it done? Today, we have gone into the basics and the concepts of zoning. We've listed the players in zoning, the governing body, the planning commission, the zoning hearing board, the township administration, and finally the people. And we've told you the means of how land use control is decided and implemented. In our next two programs, we will go into the specifics of zoning law as it affects the citizens of Upper St. Clair.
Thank you, Bob. That was very interesting.
Welcome.
Now for the questions from the League of Women Voters. To my left, we have Trudy Rose and Betty Sweeney. Now, you know, we're all anxious to get on to our questions. Bob, I have one.
Okay.
You talked about citizens and the appointment of the planning board and the zoning board. Could you tell me how many members are on each board?
There are 3 citizens on the zoning hearing board, which are appointed by the commissioners, as are all the boards. And on the planning commission, there are 7 citizens, all appointed by the commissioners. These citizens serve various terms, generally staggered, as do the citizens on the other boards and the zoning hearing board.
Thank you.
Bob, I'd like to know what the qualifications are for members of the Planning Commission.
Well, as do the citizens of, for every board position, the citizens apply and list the qualifications. Then the township management and commissioners go through the applications, and they have what they call a data bank or a qualification bank of applications. And on the planning commission, they look for different professions, such as in architecture, perhaps an attorney, perhaps an engineer, but there are no legislative qualifications. That is, there are no qualifications as a matter of law for any of these boards. It's simply a matter of trying to use common sense and select an array of citizens that makes up the general overview of the citizenship, and appoint some people with a professional background so that you can get professional advice on the boards.
So you're saying basically that is what the commissioners look for in selecting from the citizens?
Yes, they look for an overview of the community, and they look for some professional qualifications in some members.
Mm-hmm. And what about a technical background?
Well, the technical background is good, but not necessary. That is, I believe today we have one architect on the Planning Commission, which I think is very useful. But again, it's a question of the overall overview of the community being represented, rather than appointing all technical people.
Good. Now, who gives technical information to the people on the board?
The technical information on the Planning Commission, for example, is given by the Township Administration. Right now, Carolee Hemington is the head of the Department of Planning and Community Development in the township, and she generally does the research and the memorandums and the study so that the Planning Commission members have, before each meeting, an understanding of the issues raised at that meeting. I give advice when called upon, and I attend the Planning Commission meetings, but generally it's up to the Department of Community Affairs and Planning to provide the Planning Commission members with the technical background they need, so that they can then make the decision based on that technical background.
What are the qualifications for, you said Mrs. Hemington is in the Community Development Department. What kind of a background would somebody that works in that type of job have?
Well, the Department of Planning and Community Development really has, as a background, generally professional planners work in the head position, and Carolee is a professional planner. There are also needed other associates in that department, such as, for instance, someone who is familiar with buildings to be the building inspector. And right now we have an architect who is a building inspector, our building inspector, and then there are other staff personnel, which are secretarial personnel, etc. Right now, for example, we have another professional planner that's been working on the comprehensive plan. So the general background in community development is professional planning plus someone is familiar with building to handle the codes enforcement, which could be an architect or an engineer or just someone with experience in that area.
At the last commissioners meeting that I attended, and Caroline Hemington was presenting township information, I was interested what type of a course, when you say a professional planner, do they study land use? I'm just curious, when
Yes.
you say a professional planner, what does that mean?
Well, it means a person who has generally gotten a master's degree in urban planning, and various universities have that course offered, and they study land use planning and controls, and it's a whole field in its own, and it has to do with long-range planning and other planning that sometimes is not used in practice as much as theory, because many times, you know, you're caught up in the crisis of the moment in communities, but it is a whole planning, urban development course.
Good. I will be real crass. I just wanted to know to whom do they apply and who makes the final decision?
You mean when the administration...
When you're hiring.
When they're hiring, the manager makes the final decision under our law. In the home rule community, the manager hires everybody.
Oh, thank you.
What qualifications are required for the zoning hearing board? Since they're a judicial board, is background in law required?
It's not required, but often they will appoint a lawyer to the zoning hearing board. Right now, there doesn't happen to be a lawyer on the zoning hearing board. They generally just pick citizens that are interested. Again, a technical background is important and good. Some sort of experience in building or construction, that kind of experience. Engineering is very good. I think that whether you're a practicing lawyer or not really isn't that important. I believe one of the gentlemen now on the board has a law degree but is not a practicing attorney. Certainly very helpful. But I think the most important thing for both of these boards is really, when it comes down to it, is how hard the people work and their devotion to the job.
Is there any opportunity for, since it is important that these decisions, as you said, be made on the basis of law, not on the basis of what would be attractive or what sometimes seems more popular, is there some kind of training to familiarize the board members with the law?
Yes, there are many training sessions available to familiarize citizens with zoning law. These sessions are run by various institutions in Western Pennsylvania. Number one, the Department of Community Affairs runs sessions. Number two, Southwestern Regional Planning Commission runs sessions. As a matter of fact, I gave a zoning lecture to inspector-type people and commissioners a couple of weeks ago, a whole morning session on zoning. Also, the University of Pittsburgh holds evening classes to train planning commissioners and train government officials. So you can get the background in this area from many places in Western Pennsylvania in the evening, on Saturdays, at various times.
And then the liaison providing the technical information for the zoning hearing board would be roughly the same people as for the planning commission?
Well, it's not quite. Generally, the building inspector of the township, who is in the Department of Community Affairs, is the liaison contact with the township from the zoning hearing board. And he administratively, or she administratively, handles that contact and keeps the zoning hearing board agenda, keeps the zoning hearing board informed with the particular problems before the board. For example, the township may be against or for a particular variance or request before the zoning hearing board. Sometimes the township favors it, sometimes the township doesn't. And the building inspector presents the township's view on the particular request. And that way, the zoning hearing board, although they're not bound by what the township's view is, that is, they can vote the way they want to vote, they at least know what the township's view is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Bob, I remember you talking about your pig farm. Well, I understand it's unacceptable to the neighbors, and they would like, in the whole community, people do not want it. And I have heard that the neighbors would like to have the township turn this property, your property, over to natural land, where open land, where children and adults could walk, a nature type. What happens if in a situation like this where the citizens go down and they are demanding the township not allow you to have your pig farm and yet take your land and turn it into a natural nature area?
Well, first, I like the example of the pig farm, Dottie, because I think it really is very pointed to what zoning's all about. For example, to digress just a second and then I'll answer your question, in the example of you can't zone it for a pig farm and then complain about the stink, it really says that if the planning commission and the township or municipality is on the ball, they will have reviewed the zoning and they will have changed the zoning to be in conformance with the law and to prevent something like that happening. But let's look at the example of the pig farm. Number one, they could rezone the property and make it a non-conforming use. And if you make it a non-conforming use, it is possible under Pennsylvania law, in some instances, to do what is called amortized non-conforming uses, which means that you can say, well, here, you are able to operate the farm, but you can only do it for 5 years or 10 years. So that's one possible solution to do that. The other possible solution in any zoning is that you can always condemn the property if you want to pay the owner of the property the value of the property. You can condemn any property for public purposes. So that if you have a particularly disturbing or obnoxious use and you want to make it a public park or a public building or whatever public purpose you want to use it for, you can condemn it. Of course, in that case, you must pay the owner of the property the fair market value of the property. And that points up an important thing in zoning. You can't zone property to the point where you take the property. That is, you make the property useless. And that's important to remember that, because if you zone a property so that it's useless, then you are causing, in essence, a constructive taking or condemnation of the property, and the township or municipality has to pay the cost of that.
Thank you, Bob. That answers my question.
I have a question. If I want to build a swimming pool, where do I start? Who do I see? How do I get the whole thing?
Well, the procedure in wanting to build any structure, and the zoning ordinance talks about structures, which has a wide definition, always starts with going into the Department of Community Development and saying, I would like to build a swimming pool. What do I do? And they will give you the proper applications that you would fill out for building a swimming pool. And if the swimming pool were a permitted use, they would simply have you fill it out and you would be able to start immediately. If the swimming pool is a special exception, then you would have to go to the zoning hearing board. If it would be a conditional use, you would have to go to the commissioners. So they will lead you through the application process for any particular structure that you are applying for. It might be a swimming pool, it might be a side garage, it might be a dog house, might be a fence. They're all structures, and you have to apply.
And that's where I'd start, and from there on, they take over and tell me
That's right.
the rest of the steps.
And they assist you in filling it out and getting it to the right board or in the right agenda slot, so it would go to the Planning Commission if it were going there, or wherever.
Thank you.
Bob, could you tell us what our next program will be about?
I sure will. In fact, the next two programs are my favorite programs. They involve the really gut issues of zoning. And the next program is entitled The Zoning Game, Name the Animals. And the reason you have to name the right animal of zoning is because if you misidentify the animal and go to pet it, it might bite you.
If you have program suggestions for the League of Women Voters community information programming, please write League of Women Voters of Upper St. Clair, 171 Boxfield Road, Pittsburgh, 15241. For the League of Women Voters, I'm Dottie Kay, and I want to thank you, Bob Hackett. It was a very interesting program, and I would like to thank Trudy Rose and Betty Sweeney.